Dalton Pilot, Windsor House. And so I told Mrs. Ramsay that I really didn't care if I have to stay in a dorm. It's long enough a commute for gas money, and I just can't stand the thought of having to have my dad pay for any more than he and Carol already have. Kurt hugged the books to his chest and kept his head down. Blaine considered this posture. Kurt held himself ramrod straight with good bearing as usual, but the way he kept his head down and refused to look most Dalton boys in the eye made it clear that he had yet to become truly comfortable in the new environment. Blaine glanced at David, who was looking up from where he had previously been studying sheet music, also glancing at Kurt. The two warblers exchanged a glance that acknowledged what they had both noticed, and the lead warbler turned to the prospective one. "Well, we'd be more than happy to have you at our dorm, of course." You bored?" Kurt blinked up at him. "Windsor," Blaine nodded, averting his gaze with as much of a casual air as he could adopt. Whenever Kurt bestowed the full power of those incredible facetious eyes, which at the moment were amplified by the floods of sunlight from the bay windows, towards him, thinking rationally became difficult. Blaine pretended not to notice the steep drop in Blaine's general intellect and simply rolled his eyes. But he said, "There are still a few rooms free at Windsor, you know." Windsor House, in the east wing, was one of the 3 dormitories of Dalton, the others being Hanover House, farther in the west wing, and Stewart House in the north wing. The south and main was where all the main classrooms and facilities were housed. Blaine nodded, just slightly too enthusiastically to be noticed. "We can talk to Mr. Howard for you. He's the head of Windsor House." "Are you sure that's all right?" Kurt asked carefully. He had only been to Dalton for a few hours, and was still getting his bearings, but even he understood there were certain societal standings in the school. Each dormitory was protective of its own fraternal pride, and the boys often segregated accordingly while travelling in packs. Kurt marvelled at the amount of gossip he'd heard about all this in under a day, and concluded that boys generally talk as much as girls do. "Of course it's all right," David smiled kindly. "Besides, even though the group is a big hodgepodge, there are more warblers in Windsor than there are in Stewart and Hanover. We're pressed for rehearsal time as it is. It'll be easier for you to catch up if you were practising with us. Assuming you got accepted, of course." David looked almost apologetic as he amended that last part. Kurt swallowed and let out his breath. "Right," he nodded. "I get to finally try out." "Hey, don't worry too much," Blaine smiled. "You'll get in, I'm sure." Kurt smiled faintly at him. "Thanks, but since you've actually never heard me sing, I'll take your prophecy with a grain of salt." He smirked and lifted one charming eyebrow. "There's Wes." Blaine then waved his friend over in an attempt to not get snagged by another "Kurt gives me an adorable expression" trap. "And he's still alive! He dodged Madame Sinclair's bullet." Catching sight of the other 3, Wes jogged up to them, breaking free from the mass of boys that had just come out of the French professor's forum. David greeted him with a grin. "And how did it go? Was there blood? Your brain seems to be intact." "I refuse to study any more French," Wes sighed with a little melodrama as propriety allowed. He had manifestly determined to help Blaine rein in the madness of Dalton, so as not to scare the new boy too much just yet. "If I promise to refuse my parents' yearly trip to Paris, I won't need it any more, right?" The others laughed. "I'll help you if you like," Kurt offered with a grin. "You?" Wes raised an eyebrow. He glanced at the other 2 boys before turning back to Kurt. "No offence, but does McKinley drill juniors that hard on advanced French?" "Trust me, I can help," Kurt said confidently. "I've over-exaggeratedly given emphasis on French." The red and white uniform that was still hidden in the depths of his wardrobe was a testament to that. "If you don't pass next week's oral, I'll buy you lattes for a week." "Well, what do you know? We are just too lucky to have you." Wes's expression flashed to Blaine, implying something that the other boy might have previously said. Blaine coloured up just slightly, but he did accidentally jab Wes in the ribs as he cleared his throat and moved forward to keep his place next to Kurt as they walked. The 2 behind them looked at each other and bumped fists with barely disguised snickers. Blaine looked at Kurt and gave him a smile. Kurt returned it, still anxious, but felt better. "And this is Dalton Academy. As you may know, I've just transferred here in order to avoid some difficulties in McKinley. Don't get me wrong, I love the Glee Club back at McKinley, but the truth is, push came to shove, and now, here I am. I'm officially a student at Dalton. My problem is that my plans got as far as actually going to Dalton. Now I'm here, I realise I've made absolutely no plans as to what I intend to happen to me here. Fortunately, I have Blaine, David, and Wes, to, for better or worse, lead me to some direction. Come on, David called as he jogged ahead down the steps. If we want to catch Howard, we've got to get early into the dining hall. What are you talking to Howard for? Wes asked as he followed. Getting the newbie into Windsor. Wes's smothered burst of derisive laughter was checked by Blaine's glower. Wes backpedalled. Whoa, I mean, sure. Hey, maybe Howard won't kill us if we ask this time. Gee, good luck getting up to the professor's table, David. I won't be joining you, but I'll be sending flowers to your grave. Is there something about Mr. Howard I should know? Kurt asked, blanching just a little. I am to meet the man, and I think I'd like to remain intact after I do. It's not you, it's us, Blaine sighed. This isn't the first time we've tried to get someone into Windsor. Or the second, chipped in David. Or third, added Wes. Or fifth, or sixth. What is going on here? Wes stared. New people don't last long at Windsor. Wes smiled faintly. And when they do, it doesn't really help Windsor's case. Why? The other three paused, looking at each other. Kurt looked at them and gestured expectantly. Well? David grinned. We're not supposed to scare you this early. Blaine said so. The lead warbler lunged at him. David ducked, tucked, rolled, and sprang up again, but Blaine turned back to Kurt and responded. Don't listen to him. It's just that it takes a special kind of person to tolerate some of the crazy that goes on in Windsor. Not just in the common room, it's everywhere. Kurt, a veteran of madness who had survived over a year of glee at McKinley, where he had been drunk, slushied, had walked around as Lady Gaga, had been a football player, a cheerleader, had experienced hallucinations, some incredibly wild performance numbers, dealt with a psychopathic cheerleading coach, a neurotic guidance counsellor, a glee teacher stuck in the 80s, occurred a heated battle against soulless robots, vocal adrenaline, and, most importantly, had dealt with the issues of the entire Glee Club and Rachel Berry, who deserved a separate mention, now lifted an eyebrow. Crazy? No. Blaine turned up the wattage of a smile. Come on, Mr. Howard, seriously. You're not going to have a problem with Kurt. That's what you said when you brought Dwight. And Dwight is still in Windsor, David exclaimed happily. Unfortunately, he still is. The tall, sprightly man glowered down at them. When you told me that he had odd habits, you didn't say that he was even more superstitious than an old homemaker in the 1800s. So he likes to hang cloves of garlic at his windows. Wes, who had, despite his better judgment, decided to participate in getting the new one into Windsor, to spare them Blaine's promise of undying vengeance should he not, tried to adopt a nonchalant tone. We've already convinced him to stop lining his doorways with salt. And we told him to stop ghost hunting at the old cathedral, David supplied. How's the caretaker doing, by the way? I don't know what kind of food colouring Dwight used, but as I understand it, that brand on Mr. Tamberlane's arm is still there, Howard all but roared. Blaine winced, grateful that they'd caught the head of house while he was still in the hall. They were given a few odd looks by some passing Hanover boys, who may have known what was up. Kurt remained at one side, quiet, seemingly intent on trying to ignore what he was hearing. And seriously, Kurt is more normal than some of us, Blaine said with a smile. He went to his old school's glee club. That's about it. We were hoping he'll join the Warblers. If you want him to join your group, that's fine, but he'll be complaining to me in a week, I'm sure. Howard crossed his arms over his chest. Actually, Kurt finally said, and they looked at him, I've put up with quite a lot of strange things at my old school. I'm sure this is fine. Seemed to be taken aback by this, and moved past the other three boys. He looked at Kurt over his spectacles. Kurt looked up at the man's great height and did the same. Todd Howard had been the head of Windsor House for nearly 20 years. Having been given that position allowed him to watch the nation's future leaders come and go from Windsor House, some of them returning to visit on occasion. In recent years, things did not go as peacefully as he liked, sometimes even less. Windsor may be a very popular house, but if there was anything about it that was notable, it would be that life is never, for better or worse, boring. Making a life out of refereeing all this, at the very least allowed him to read a boy's bearings early on. He gave Kurt a look over. "What's your name, son?" "Kurt Hummel, sir," Kurt smiled. Howard considered the small boy with the elfin features. "So you sing?" "Yes." "Is that all?" "Well, I like fashionable clothes." "And?" "And what?" "Unusual sleeping habits, food allergies, odd hobbies, tendencies to destroy property, uproot magnolias out of compulsion, walk backwards, release lab animals, recite the entire Summa Theologica in Latin." Kurt was barely able to stop giving him an "are you crazy" expression. He instead looked out of the corner of his eyes to Blaine. Blaine just shrugged, trying not to smile. Howard saw where I was looking and glanced back to Blaine, who immediately put on another charming grin. David and Wes were veritable twin angels, who looked like they had no idea what Howard was talking about. Howard turned back to Kurt. "Are you positive that you would like to board at Windsor?" "I don't see why I shouldn't." The coughing from Wes and David nearly gave it all away, but even Howard seemed to understand. He sighed and looked over at Kurt. "Fine. Windsor it is." He turned to the other three. "I'll be keeping an eye on this one. Make sure you boys don't scar him too much." After Marcus Howard fled Windsor for Stuart, "His loss," David scoffed. "Reed thought he was sick and was just trying to help," Wes added. "Which is why he threw 22 comforters on top of him while he slept." "Guys!" Blaine snapped. Silence. The three boys looked at Mr. Howard expectantly, and Howard looked at the new boy, cogitating. Kurt took this opportunity to give Mr. Howard his best "I really don't give a damn" look. "And so when do I move in?"